The heaviest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of their parents. Have you ever felt that silent weight? Dreams you never dreamed, fears you never chose, expectations handed down like an invisible inheritance? Sometimes we don't notice it at first. We step into the world believing our path is our own, but in the quiet moments, we find ourselves walking roads built long before we were born. I remember the first time I realized I was chasing goals that weren't really mine. It was as if I had inherited an unfinished symphony, melodies composed by someone else's longing, repeating in my mind, growing louder with each choice I made. Carl Jung once wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their children than the unlived life of the parent." But he didn't mean just childhood lessons. He meant the silent transmission of unfinished hopes, unspoken regrets, and broken ambitions that children unknowingly try to resolve. It's not about blame. It's about a legacy passed through gestures, glances, even the smallest family rituals. A father who gave up art for stability, a mother who buried her wanderlust for duty. They rarely tell you in words. Instead, you inherit the script. You feel it in the pressure to become what they could not. You absorb the fears that kept them from risking, the dreams they folded away for later. Their story becomes a shadow trailing your every step. Jung called this the secret contract. Children unconsciously promise to fulfill the abandoned dreams of those who raised them, believing that, in doing so, they'll finally heal what went unfinished. But the cost is heavy. You begin to confuse your own desires with theirs. Their failures haunt your ambitions. Their sacrifices shape your boundaries. And sometimes, without realizing, you lose your voice because you are speaking someone else's truth. I saw it in myself. The urge to impress, to make up for disappointments I'd only heard about in family stories. The strange guilt when I longed for things my parents had once wanted and never claimed. The confusion when I felt restless in the life I'd built, unsure why satisfaction always felt out of reach. The world tells you to honor your parents, but rarely warns you about the dangers of living their unfinished lives. The heaviest burdens are often invisible, stitched into the fabric of who you believe you're supposed to be. This story is about learning to see that weight, to name it, and, ultimately, to lay it down. Because real freedom begins the moment you recognize which parts of your story were never truly yours. Look around, and you'll see it everywhere. Maybe you grew up in a family where your father dreamed of being a musician but became an accountant instead. So he quietly signed you up for piano lessons, praised every little performance, and lived for your recitals. You never asked if music was your dream. You just felt the weight of making it mean something for him. Or maybe your mother once wanted to travel, to see the world, but responsibility kept her close to home. Suddenly, every plan you make for college or work is met with a quiet worry, as if your leaving is not just about your future, but about the miles she never traveled. Sometimes the legacy is more subtle. Maybe your parents feared risk, grew up with nothing, and so taught you that security is everything. You feel the pressure to choose a safe job, settle down quickly, build a life that won't fall apart. Their anxiety becomes your hesitation, their caution, your invisible fence. Jung wrote, "Children are educated by what the grown-up is and not by his talk." It's not just words, but the unspoken energy in the home, ambition in their silence, regret in their eyes, hope wrapped in pride and disappointment. How many times have you seen a friend take over the family business, not because they wanted it, but because they felt there was no other way to honor the sacrifices made for them? How many daughters feel they must become the caretaker, the good girl, inheriting not just chores but the emotional burdens their mothers never laid down? Jung warned, the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. He believed these legacies move through families like shadows, shaping each generation's sense of what is possible, permissible, or forbidden. Why does this happen? Jung saw it as an unconscious contract. Children sense what remains unfinished and try, often without knowing, to resolve it through their own choices. The family's soul wants healing, and the child becomes its hope for redemption. But this burden is heavy. Living out a story that isn't yours creates quiet resentment, hidden guilt, and a haunting sense that you are never quite enough. No wonder, then, that so many people reach adulthood only to find themselves restless, dissatisfied, unable to explain the sadness that follows every achievement. So I'll ask you directly, are you carrying dreams, fears, or duties that truly belong to your parents, not you? Have you seen this pattern in your own life? or in the lives of those around you? What invisible burdens, handed down as love or duty, still shape your choices today? You're not alone if you feel this. Recognizing it is the first step toward living your own life, not just finishing someone else's story. If you've inherited your parents' ambitions, it's natural to ask, does it make you happy, or are you simply acting out a script you never wrote? Maybe you became a doctor because your father once dreamed of wearing a white coat. Maybe you teach because your mother spoke of students she never had. Sometimes, following these paths truly feels right. You wake up, pour your energy into the work, and find a strange satisfaction in each small victory. But even then, you must pause and wonder, is this real joy, or is it something you convinced yourself to feel? Jung believed that the unconscious is a powerful actor, shaping not just your choices but your emotions about them. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, what if your pride, your excitement, your so-called fulfillment is really an echo of someone else's longing? Your subscription and comment aren't just numbers. They're signals that decide what video comes next. Share your thoughts or ideas in the comments. They often become the foundation for news stories. Interestingly, over 90% of viewers watch my videos without subscribing. That's okay. It means the content pulls you in. But subscribing helps you stay updated with the next parts. Hit subscribe, and let's create the next video together. Disguised as your own? How would you know the difference? Try this. When you succeed, whose face appears in your mind first? Is it your own or your parents'? When you struggle, do you feel fear of your own failure or fear of letting someone else down? True satisfaction feels light, expansive, like breathing clean air. Self-suggestion, that subtle act of convincing yourself you want what you're supposed to want, feels heavier, more brittle, a kind of forced enthusiasm that needs constant reassurance. Jung called this phenomenon identification, when a child fuses their sense of self with a parent's unfulfilled story. He warned that such identification can bring temporary comfort, but always at a cost, the risk of never discovering your own authentic desires. If you love your path, ask yourself honestly, is this love free or inherited? Are you the author of your own ambition, or merely the latest scribe in a family chronicle? But what if the opposite is true? What if you walk this road with no real joy? Each day another step in a journey that grows heavier with time. Why do you keep going? Is it loyalty, guilt, habit, or simply fear of hurting those who sacrificed for you? Perhaps you fear that breaking the pattern will mean betraying your roots, or being left alone with the uncertainty of your own unknown wishes. Jung observed, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. And yet, to break free from this cycle, you must first see it for what it is, a sacred but invisible pact, waiting to be questioned. So what will you find if you finally stop and look? Are you living your own life, or someone else's hope, wrapped in your skin? But before you answer, consider this. What if everything you believe about duty, loyalty, and love is about to be turned upside down? Let me tell you a story, not of some distant stranger, but of a student who once sat with Jung, searching for answers to the unrest he carried inside. His name was Emil, though it could have been any of us. Emil's father had always wanted to be a great businessman, a man of influence and achievement. But fate, or perhaps his own limitations, saw those dreams dissolve into a series of failures. As Emil's father grew older, those lost ambitions didn't fade. They hardened, settling deep within the walls of their home. When Emil was born, his father began to pour every lesson, every regret, every piece of advice into his son. From childhood, Emil was taught about risk and negotiation, about profit and loss. Success brought praise, but when the deals fell through or a business failed, his father's face grew stormy. The house would go silent, thick with disappointment. Emil learned that his victories brought warmth, but his failures made him feel invisible. He grew up with an inner script that was both a blessing and a curse, to succeed where his father could not, to prove that the family legacy was not one of defeat. Emil became sharp, disciplined, hungry for every small win. Yet, even in his successes, there was an emptiness he could not shake, a sense that the game he was playing was not truly his own. One evening, sitting across from Jung, Emil shared his story in halting words. It's as if my life is a second chance for him. When I win, it's not really my victory. When I fail, it's twice the shame, mine and his. He spoke of the pressure, the constant self-doubt, the strange guilt that crept in even when the business thrived. Jung listened quietly, then said something that struck Emil to the core. The unlived life of the parent becomes the secret destiny of the child, unless the child awakens to it. Jung explained that Emil's quest was not just about business, but about an inherited mission, a story passed down in silence, a hope that someone would redeem what had gone unfinished. Jung's words startled Emil. For the first time, he saw his own ambition as a kind of inheritance, shaped as much by love and loyalty as by his own true desires. You have done well, Jung said. But you must now ask, what is success to you? If you live only to finish your father's story, you may succeed in the world, but fail yourself. That night, Emil realized the difference between living for approval and living from within. He saw that honoring his father's journey did not mean surrendering his own. So, what do you do when you discover the life you're living isn't entirely your own? Sometimes, the answer begins with a single question. What would you do if your only task was to be true, not to your parents' ghosts, but to your own soul? Jung believed that breaking free from the hidden legacy of your parents begins with radical self-honesty. His first piece of advice: learn to listen deeply to your own voice, even when it is quiet and uncertain. Every true change starts with the courage to admit that some of your dreams, habits, or fears may not belong to you at all. He encouraged his students to look for the difference between inherited loyalty and genuine desire. Sometimes that means stepping back from the expectations swirling around you, to ask, does this goal still resonate when I'm alone with myself? If your answer feels empty or heavy, it's a signal. Time to re-examine whose story you are living. The next step is to create space for your own ambitions to surface. Jung often told his patients to spend time alone in nature, away from family voices and obligations. In that silence, your own longings have room to speak. It may feel strange at first, even uncomfortable, but with time you begin to recognize the difference between what you truly want and what you've been taught to want. Another powerful tool: write down your dreams, disappointments, even your anger. Journaling brings the unconscious to light. You see, in your own words, the patterns that have shaped you. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but it is also the most liberating. As you write, ask, if you could choose any path, with no one to impress or disappoint, what would you do tomorrow? Sometimes, resisting family influence means learning to say no, not out of rebellion, but from a place of self-respect. If you fear disappointing someone, remember, the cost of betraying yourself is always higher than the discomfort of breaking a pattern. Jung advised to surround yourself with people who support your true self, not just the version of you that fits their expectations. And don't be afraid to seek help. Mentors, therapists, or even honest friends can serve as mirrors, reflecting back your authentic desires when you lose sight of them. You are not meant to do this work alone. Above all, Jung believed in the power of conscious choice. Every day, you are given the chance to step into your own story, to write a new page, to be the first in your line to choose differently. Let me say something personal to you now. I read every comment you leave under these videos. I see your stories, your struggles, your victories, and your doubts. Each message is a piece of our shared journey. Don't be afraid to speak your truth here. This is more than a channel. We are building a strong community together, one where your voice matters, where your growth is celebrated, and where no one has to carry their burdens alone. If you're wrestling with these questions, know that you're not weak, you're awake. And there is nothing more powerful than a person who chooses to live, at last, as themselves. Jung was not alone in his reflections on inherited destinies. Another powerful voice in modern philosophy, Alexander Strauss, often wrote about the hidden patterns that weave through families, shaping choices, relationships, and even ambitions in ways we seldom notice. Strauss didn't speak of burdens, but of echoes, subtle vibrations that travel through generations, coloring the way a person sees the world, and, most importantly, themselves. Strauss famously said, "We do not begin as blank pages. Our first lines are written by voices we never heard, in languages we never learned." He argued that what we call instinct or gut feeling is sometimes the residue of these ancestral echoes, shaping how we react to love, risk, or even happiness. Think about the moments when you pause before accepting a new opportunity, when a strange feeling of doubt creeps in, or when joy is shadowed by an inexplicable worry. According to Strauss, these reactions can be inherited codes, passed along like a family heirloom. One of Strauss's most striking ideas was the concept of emotional genealogy. He believed that just as we inherit eye color or posture, we also inherit unfinished emotional business. Some of our greatest fears, he wrote, are borrowed. Some of our greatest ambitions are on loan. The process of becoming fully ourselves, Strauss argued, means learning to distinguish between what is authentically ours and what belongs to another's forgotten story. In therapy, Strauss would ask his students and patients to map their emotional family tree. He encouraged them to notice repeating patterns. Were there generations of broken friendships? Was there a legacy of sudden moves or repeated failures in love? He believed that recognizing these motifs allowed people to step off the repeating wheel and choose a new direction, one that matched their true self, not just their family history. Self-knowledge, Strauss insisted, is not isolation from the past, but the gentle art of choosing which parts to carry forward and which to release. He challenged his students to ask, when you pursue success, are you chasing your own dream or racing to outrun someone else's shadow? When you hesitate, is it caution or memory? When you find yourself repeating a familiar mistake, whose footsteps echo behind you? Strauss's approach was not to reject the past, but to understand it deeply. He taught that freedom comes not from denying where you come from, but from seeing it clearly, then deciding, bravely, to write the next chapter on your own terms. If you've ever wondered why some emotions seem older than your years, or why you struggle to break habits that feel inherited, you're not alone. The work of self-liberation is ongoing, and as Strauss reminds us, it is as much about awareness as it is about courage. You're probably wondering, what exactly is this intriguing idea of emotional genealogy? Let me explain, because it may change how you see not just your family, but yourself. Alexander Strauss described emotional genealogy as the invisible map of feelings, patterns, and reactions passed down through generations, just like family heirlooms or the shape of your nose. Unlike physical inheritance, these emotional threads aren't always obvious. You can live your whole life feeling fear of abandonment, bursts of anger, or an urge to run from intimacy, never realizing you are echoing the inner world of someone you never met. Strauss believed every family has its own emotional DNA, formed by the joys, traumas, disappointments, and triumphs of those who came before. He would say, our lives are symphonies begun by ancestors, and each of us adds a note, a pause, or a crescendo. Imagine a grandfather who lost everything in a war, returning home cautious and wary. Decades later, his grandson might find himself obsessively saving money or panicking at every sign of instability without knowing why. Take another example. Maria, a young woman whose grandmother suffered a heartbreaking betrayal but never spoke about it. Maria grows up with a mysterious distrust of close relationships. She wants to love deeply but always finds herself pulling away when things get real. No one in the family ever warns her about trust, yet her actions mirror a story left unfinished. Or think of a boy, David, whose father never expressed joy openly, believing that showing happiness is risky. Don't tempt fate, he'd say. David, as an adult, achieves success, but can't enjoy it. Celebration always brings guilt or a sense of danger. He's living in response to a caution that isn't really his own. Strauss encouraged people to map these emotional inheritances, asking, where do your biggest fears come from? Why do certain situations trigger feelings out of proportion to the moment? Whose voice do you hear when you doubt yourself, or hold back, or run from connection? He taught that understanding your emotional genealogy isn't about blaming your family. It's about seeing clearly what is yours to keep and what you are free to release. Awareness is liberation, Strauss wrote. The more you recognize which feelings are echoes, the easier it is to choose consciously, to respond rather than react, to write a new melody for the next generation. This idea challenges us all. What if the emotions that most shape your destiny were set in motion long before you were born? And what new possibilities might open up if you could see them, honor them, and then, at last, make your own choice? In the Middle Ages, kingdoms were passed down from father to son, along with crowns, castles, and all the unspoken expectations of a royal bloodline. Not every heir wanted to rule, but tradition was stronger than desire. Some became great kings, shaping history with wisdom and courage. Others wore the crown like a chain, living not for themselves, but for the shadows of ancestors they never met. A wise philosopher once said, true royalty is not in the blood, but in the courage to rule your own destiny. Just because you inherit a kingdom does not mean you must follow every old law or repeat every ancient mistake. The bravest rulers rewrote the rules, built something new, and left a legacy of freedom for those who followed. You too are the king of your own life. What you choose today is your true inheritance. Will you rule as a copy of those before you, or as a strong, wise, and courageous king who writes his own legend? If this message resonates with you, subscribe to our community. Let's build an empire of strong, kind kings together, men who honor the past, but live boldly in the present. Your story is not written by history alone. Take your crown. Live as the king you were meant to be.